Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry, afternoon. What time is it? 9:40 in the morning, y'all. It's been that kind of year. But welcome to our session, Our Way Forward, Higher Education's Role in Advancing Equity. My name is Monica Johnson, and I am the Assistant Vice President for Diversity Education and Cross-Cultural Engagement at Indiana University for the system. And I'm excited to be here today with a group of people that I find to be absolutely amazing, who, as many people will say, do this work. And the work that we are talking about is the actual work of advancing equity, whether that is through a faculty or teaching role or through an administrative role, or staff position, and even as students. So we are excited to have folks join us today. Just a few housekeeping pieces. We will have a portion for questions toward the end of the session. Please place your questions in the Q&A box. And when we get to the space for being able to have questions, we'll make sure to tap into those. I have, again, as I told you, a group of amazing people who have joined us. And I really don't like to, sorry, my iPad moved. I really don't like to introduce people. I like for people to be able to put their own flavor and flair onto things. So we are going to let them introduce themselves. But I do want to tell you where we're going today. So thank you, James Wallace, for helping me with this. Can you pop up the session agenda slide for me? So we're going to do a welcome. I hope y'all feel welcome. Welcome. We're going to allow the panelists to introduce themselves. We're going to have a moderated discussion. I prepared 3 to 4 questions for them to ask, or to ask and for them to answer. And we're going to have the questions from our audience. And then I'm going to give everybody the opportunity to share their final thoughts before we head up out of here. So we're going to have folks introduce themselves in alphabetical order. First and foremost, we will bring up Rachel Brooks. Rachel, can you pop on and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. As Monica said, my name is Rachel Brooks. I am the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs for Bloomington and the Indianapolis campus. Previously, before arriving at IU, which was only since March of this year, so my position, I am very new to my position. I was the Director of Diversity and Inclusion Initiatives for the College of Liberal Arts at Purdue University. I am originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, go Bucks, and I graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is my alma mater, and I'm really happy to be here today. I love Indiana Black Expo, and I'm so glad that Monica invited me, so thank you.
Next, Dr. Carl Darnell.
Hello and good morning. My name is Carl, no middle name, Darnell, PhD. I'm the Assistant Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the Indiana University Bloomington School of Education. I'm also the Director of the Hudson and Holland Scholars Program, the Director of the Balfour Scholars Program, the Co-Director of the I Can Persist STEM Initiative, and it's a pleasure to be here. I hail from Huntsville, Alabama. So I like to represent the South. And I also graduated from Tennessee State University. So I had to throw a shout out to my alma mater. Glad to be here.
Carl, I obviously didn't have enough room to put all the things that you are titled to do at this point, but we are also very excited for you to be here. Dr. Rosalind Davis, introduce yourself, please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rosalind Davis. I am a clinical associate professor of psychology in IU Kokomo. That's my main gig. I'm also the faculty diversity liaison, which means I help faculty work on incorporating diversity into our curriculum. I'm the affirmative action liaison, and I'm the director of the mental health counseling program. So like Carl and most of the folks on here, we all have 18 jobs, and all of mine relate to diversity on some level. So that is my main priority within our system on my campus, and we are working, making sure daily that we get better at doing what we do. Oh, I forgot to tell you where I was from. My fault.
Oh, that's right. Go ahead.
I am from Dallas, Texas, mostly, but I'm a military brat and I've been some of everywhere. I was probably not in school at the same time as Carl, but I went to Fisk University up the road from that, Tennessee State, and went to a Hispanic Serving Institution after that, and then a PWI at Ball State to get my PhD. So I will shut up now. Thank you, Dr. Wallace.
Go for it, Dr. Wallace.
Good morning, everyone. My name is James Wallace, and I'm still getting used to being called Dr. Wallace. I just finished my PhD in Urban Education Studies at IUPUI in May. I'm the director of the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Multicultural Affairs on the campus of IU Northwest, helping the campus maintain and monitor its commitment to diversity and inclusion, some community outreach, programs to support our students, underrepresented students, and create spaces to have conversations about some of these important DEI issues. So that's what I do, and I'm really glad to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. And Dr. Wallace, who is managing the slides for me, can you click from current slide in that top corner?
I'm sorry, you want me to do what now?
Click from current slide.
From current slide. Okay.
There you go.
Okay.
All right. Cooking with grease. Okay, y'all. We have some great questions that we're going to ask our panel before we jump into the questions that you all, I'm sure, have. But the first question I have, because, if there is an elephant in the room, they say, you should at least name that thing. We all know that we survived 2020 together, those of us who had the privilege and the health to be able to come forward from that year. And that it was the year of the global pandemic, though COVID-19 is not over. We do know that there are new things that we're learning and that there are things that we have yet to discover as far as the outcomes of COVID-19 or the global pandemic. But for our higher education folks in the room, our admins, I want to ask, what did we learn from that pandemic in the higher education sense? So whoever would like to go first, go for it. But I do want to hear something from all of y'all.
I'll jump in, Monica. I think one of the most important lessons that higher education institutions have learned is the importance of building authentic relationships with our student body. That's critically important. Students felt really disconnected this last year. And, even before the pandemic, it was necessary for us to build those relationships and provide that wraparound support. And I think that institutions would do well to be more intentional about doing that and as we move forward, if we're going to be viable institutions.
I think to piggyback on that, we figured out how to pivot a lot faster than we normally do, which is outstanding for academia. For those of you that are not familiar with who we are and how we work, we were able to go from this doesn't look great to we are staying home to we have figured out how to be our best selves in this environment, given the limited resources, and how to support our students. I will give my campus massive credit for figuring out how to get hotspots to people in areas where the Wi-Fi was bad, and that we turned our parking lot into a giant hotspot because we just knew that wasn't enough. Having said that, there's always more we can do. To Dr. Wallace's point, there's stuff we still have to navigate because we're not out of it yet. We're still sort of recovering, but the amount of pivoting we were able to do with like a 6-week lead time was amazing.
I think that we learned the ultimate lesson, not just in higher ed, but as a country, about the true inequalities that we have in healthcare, in education, pretty much all the way around in every component of our system, that all people weren't being treated equally in the type of services that we provide. The fact that there were so many students who didn't have access to internet outside of the campus, or the food deserts that students then had to go back to in their communities, the lack of substantial health care, and the discrepancies in that, depending on what your body looks like in terms of if you're Black or brown. I think that it taught us a lesson that we knew, but it showed it to us right in front of our face.
Going last, I have to piggyback off of a lot of what other people said. Generally, I think what we learned in higher ed was that we could move a lot faster than we probably thought we could move a lot faster. And that not only with the moves that we made for students, but the moves that we made for our employees could be a lot faster as well. The idea that teaching can only be done in one way, or service and support can only be provided in one way, it was made very clear. And that's a lesson that you can't take away. That's something you can't take back. Oh, I can do this job from home. I can provide the support from home, and students can learn from home. There's not these requirements I think we kind of had in place, these regulars, these norms that we had in place don't have to be there. So I think we learned a lot of lessons, but mainly that we can move quickly and that work and learning can be done in different ways.
Carl, you raise a really good point when you talk about staff and employees and, being able to value, those staff that are, groundskeeping, facilities, maintenance, and the important role that they do, the seen but yet unseen role that they play on our campus and how vital they are. I think that, we have a greater appreciation for their contributions to our campuses than we did before.
I thank y'all for everything that you've shared. I also want to add that the global pandemic, in a lot of ways, took the fairy tale away. Higher education was allowed to pretend as if we created this mythical environment where it didn't matter like where you come from, what class, what pre-existing identities you came with. And then all of a sudden, specifically those folks whose students had the privilege of living on campus, we had to put them all out. And then we had to contend with the fact that some of them didn't have nowhere to go. And then we had to take part in the conversation about what housing looks like. We had to take part in the conversation about what happens when meal plans can't exist. How do people eat? And so I think we in a lot of ways than we had to be, and I'm speaking higher education broadly, not just Indiana University, because as we've all mentioned, we've been elsewhere, we've worked elsewhere, we've lived elsewhere, and we have colleagues and communities in colleges and universities of varying sizes and identity. And every last one of us had to become something that in a lot of ways we had purposefully avoided being. We purposefully avoided having to get into conversation about what happens to students when they are not actively enrolled, i.e. during the summer, i.e. during the breaks. Where do they go? How often do they go there? Are they wearing a mask or not wearing a mask? And now we are being forced to get more in depth into a conversation about health practice, about public safety. So thank you all for your answers. I think the shortest and quickest answer to this question in and of itself is that what lessons did we learn? We learned a whole lot of them, specifically the ones we could not avoid. So Dr. Wallace, can you scoot to the next slide? I'm gonna have fun calling you Dr. Wallace as much as possible. And just for the record, Rachel Brooks and I are not void of this doctor. We are pre-PhD. So
thank you.
So we actually are going to start this question with pre-PhD Rachel Brooks. What impact did the socio-political events of 2020 have on higher education broadly and our campuses specifically? So I'll let you jump into that. I know you were on another Indiana campus during a portion of 2020, but hey, welcome to the rest of the party.
I think that it's similar to our previous question. It impacted us and taught us that we are not exempt. And so we think, oftentimes, again, we've created this bubble that we think that our students are in, that our staff are in. And with the murder of George Floyd, it showed us that we're not exempt. He was just like us. There's no difference between him and I. And so when I would even have that conversation with my colleagues on my former campus, I said, there's no difference between us. You think that because I'm at this prestigious institution, I'm still a Black woman in America. That doesn't exempt me from it. But I think that what it taught campuses particularly is that this generation of students that we are dealing with now are no longer going to tolerate certain things. And they are leveraging their voices in ways that generations before us have, and saying enough is enough. We want to be seen, we want to be valued, and we want to be heard. And we want you to do something and not just say that you're going to do it. We want you to show up and keep the same energy that you had when you wrote your statements. When you see us and you tell us that you value us, we want you to keep that same energy and produce and show us and be consistent. And so I think that we're at a crossroads. Well, universities are at a crossroads where they have to either show up or step back. And if you step back, what do you risk losing?
So I'll come in here now because that's a great entry point. I felt the same way on our campus, and I think this was true for a lot of my colleagues. We were at this pivot point where we really needed to say, look, we're going to be on the front lines and we're going to address this directly, because we've not been doing this directly. We talk about initiatives to make people feel included, but we don't talk about what that means in certain spaces. That members of our basketball team were stopped repeatedly by local police departments for no good reason other than they were Black men driving. That we were not putting our money where our mouth was when it came to recruitment of students of color, or making sure they stayed here when we got them here. That we weren't acknowledging that they were struggling well before the pandemic, because there's so few of them on our campuses. So if they don't see each other on a regular basis and they don't see us, what ripple effects are we having now? So I've told people this before. I spoke on DEI issues more between June and December than I think I had the previous year, because people were finally willing to listen, and I was going to exploit every conversation I could. Because if you're finally ready to hear us, let's get this done. So I was proud of some of the work we've done, but we still have a ton of work to do. The other thing that I think we don't really give enough credence to, we're all here and we're happy to have this conversation, but we've been talking a lot for the last year and a half. And that the sort of tenor on these conversations is starting to shift. I'm starting to get resistance to certain conversations and people pulling back that energy. And so where are we going to go as a public facing institution in Indiana when we know we have a lot of conversations that need to be had to make sure we are attracting top talent and keeping top talent, as opposed to the brain drain we know we have happening? What are we going to do? And if we don't have a plan, why don't we?
Rosalind, you make a really good point. I've been doing this work for 10 years, and it's been my observation that nobody has anything to say about diversity related issues until something happens, and then everybody has an opinion. But more to the point, where are institutions that are designed to have in-depth conversations about complicated issues? Maybe a year or so ago, even beyond that, there was Milo Yiannopoulos and Richard Spencer, and colleges were on the fence about whether or not they would invite them to their campuses to speak. And I say, why not have them come and have a conversation, and then have them defend their positions in public. And maybe there's something that you can learn from these individuals, as opposed to saying, no, we're going to silence you, we're going to cancel you, we're not even going to listen to what you have to say. That produces the kinds of divisions that allows us to be in the space that we're in right now. And we have the intellectual capacity on our campuses to have that conversation and then let folks see, what's being said and then form their own opinions. And I think that's a more inclusive way to have the conversation. And I think it's a more effective way to discuss those things. Now, to this particular question, and I agree with Rachel, students on our campuses are asking our leaders to acknowledge the pain and the hurt that folks have been suffering through, to make statements and be more responsive and not wait until, the fever has passed to then, make some sort of statement. So we need to be more responsive in that respect. And I think, IU certainly has been, certainly recently. So, and I applaud that and I look for that to continue. So I'll just end there.
Yeah, to jump in there and add on what you're saying, Dr. Wallace and Dr. Davis and Brooks, the socio-political events of 2020 created a season of yes when it came to DEI. I did not get very many no's last year at all. I said, we need to connect with HBCUs. Yes, Carl. We need to get a larger budget for our office. Yes, Carl. I need extra staff. Yes, Carl. I just kept on going because it was the season of yes for DEI. And I think a lot of that, if not all of that, had to do with the laser focus that our students in the country was able to have on the plight of being Black in America. That was exacerbated and brought to the light even more really by the killings that were happening. And there's a lot that goes into it. I'm not trying to trigger anybody. There was a lot that happened. And because of that, I think there were the passion that came from some of our students and faculty and staff, as well as the guilt that was felt by some of our colleagues and coworkers, that both came together as yes, yes, and yes to what it is that you're bringing up. So it definitely had an impact. We started talking about mental health. We started talking about more support for our international students because of that whole situation with ICE and the president at the time saying that all the students had to leave. Like, there was so much more attention. And also I guess for us in the kind of DEI sphere, international students and issues started becoming a lot more connected to DEI in that moment as well, which I feel like that was also an impact of some of the things that were going on politically in the country. When it came time for somebody to advocate for somebody to stand up and speak out, I believe a lot of the international students and faculty and staff said, well, where's the group or where's the person or where's the office where they do speak out? And that's where I feel like we started getting a lot more traction in our DEI spaces from international students and international faculty and staff as well. So I believe that hopefully those connections will continue, those relationships will strengthen and broaden, and it will be a lasting impact that comes from the tragedies of 2020. And that we're also hoping that these universities continue saying yes to us. We need a lot more yeses. Let's keep that up.
And I appreciate you asking, because they can only say no if you say no. You ask the question, so put it out there. That's how we got the space for our multicultural center. I'm like, I will take it. I know it may not have been a priority, but it is now, and I'm okay with that. I think that's the other thing, that if you're in DEI work, you have to be okay with. You have to understand that sometimes you're capitalizing on a bad moment in time. And it sucks to think that way, but you also have to make the ask anyway, because it may be the thing that keeps your student in school or keeps one of your colleagues from being sent home prematurely because the current administration is saying they don't belong here for whatever reason. We had to repost a job ad to sort of sort some things out with that because we had an international hire. Those kind of things don't make sense in the larger landscape because we hired the best person. But because we are so hyper focused on, or we were, let me say, on America first, that we were not seeing the forest for the trees. And that is always a problem with us when it comes to conversations around race ethnicity, whatever you want to call it, because we don't look at things honestly. If we don't see it happening to someone we care about, we don't see it 90% of the time. And that's a problem.
So there are a couple of elements of the things that you all have shared that are just like popping into my mind. First and foremost, the two questions that you've answered thus far, you've answered them in some way in silos, but we have to be fully honest that had not one, then the other was, the impact of the other would not be as greatly felt. Like, so had not there been a global pandemic and we were as institutions hypersensitive to how our students felt connected to us because they were not physically connected to us, then we would not have, in a lot of ways, had the same sense of responsibility to engage in and address some of the things that were landing with them from a socio-political standpoint. So from a sense of belonging standpoint. So both of those things were honestly interconnected issues. They were interconnected, they lived and breathed together. And much of the yes that folks in the DEI space and higher education got was also based on something called interest convergence, which is a tenet of one of those things that people nationally are arguing against. So the fact that the gains and wins for marginalized and minoritized communities have to come as long as there is an advantage to dominant or communities in power is something that's true. So the advantage to the dominant communities in power for there to be grave changes by way of DEI is because every student, more so than ever, counted. Every enrollment dollar counted. Every person in class counted. Why did we make sure that people could be connected to the internet? Well, because we need them to be connected to the internet to connect to our classes. Before, higher education, again, full disclaimer, because you know I need my benefits. I am not speaking specifically as Indiana University. Higher education internationally needed to have students who had the privilege of internet access. Just like K through 12 needed to have internet access, right? K through 12 needed schools to give out iPads, right? Yes. The university needed students to have computers. We couldn't just count on them going to a computer lab, right? Mm-hmm. So thank you all for all you've shared. I also want to make a note that the question and answer section is on and popping, as the youth would say. Back in the day, I'm sure they got a new term for that on TikTok, but I ain't on there. But we're definitely going to get to your questions. And so far, what I've read are some really thought-provoking and amazing ones. So feel free to add more questions. Dr. Wallace, can you take us to the next slide? Okay. All right, this is a big one. What is the role of higher education institutions in advancing equity throughout the campus and local community? And when I say is, I may be saying should be. What should be the role? Because we might not be in this space right now, but what do our panelists see the role of the institution in advancing equity throughout?
Well, I think I'll jump in here. You know, I think it has to model the behavior that's in its mission, its vision, its value, as Rachel said earlier. They have to model that behavior publicly, and they have to, do, the outreach and, provide spaces for the community to be present on the campus. I'll share with you, I grew up in Evanston, Illinois, and Northwestern University is in that city. And it's on the lakefront, and I'd go up by the beach, and then I try to go up on campus because we can go fishing over by the rocks. And, me and my contemporaries, we never, ever felt comfortable in that space. The security would always run us off of that campus. Always. There was no relationship between Northwestern and Evanston Township High School. which is one of the premier high schools in Illinois. And, you know, it was never a consideration for me that I might even think about going to Northwestern University. You know, now I did graduate from a Big Ten university, IU, I'm very proud of that. But why didn't I have that same feeling growing up in Evanston? You know, what could they have done better to, and I don't want to just, well, I guess I do want to bash Northwestern. But I guess you get my point. You know, and institutions, you know, particularly like IU Northwest and Gary, you know, we want to be an open door to the community so folks can see the value of getting a quality education and how it could change your life. So, you know, I think that's one of the ways that higher education institution can advance equity, you know, by being invested in the community, by having that mutually beneficial relationship where, you know, the city grows, the community gets better, people's lives are changed, you know, the state, the nation, and the world is a better place through the work of the university.
Go ahead. I was going to say, I think that the role of higher education institutions, similar to what James said, they should be an environment where people are educated, community members are educated, and then go back into the community and are able to utilize the things that the university has taught them. And so then that makes me think about the student experience. It also makes me think about community partnerships. And so when thinking about that, an institution has the duty to support its community. That means that the needs of that community should also be being fulfilled within that institution, whether that be by teaching students, maybe if it's agriculture, to be able to go back into their communities and grow their land and mature their land, or whether it's businesses, or whatever the subject or the need of the community might be, the university and colleges need to be able to support that. And just like how we said that we suddenly had to listen to what the needs of the students were. That's something that we should have been doing. Just imagine what this pandemic would have looked like if everyone had equal access to healthcare, if everyone had access to internet and working computers and food. And you know, imagine what it would look like. But I think that the role of higher education is for us to be able to innovate those problems before they happen. It's supposed to be a place of innovation. But if we're so far behind in recognizing diversity, equity, and inclusion, how could we ever possibly innovate to a community and help it grow?
All right, now I don't want to get too Lord of the Rings on anyone, but when I think of the role of higher education institutions, especially in these times, I think of it being the hold, the keep. That is where the community that's around that university should be able to go to for protection, for support, for all of those equitable needs, not where the specific few can go, not the folks who consider themselves part of a particular class, but where the community can go. And not just can go because someone might not know that they can go there, but it's the university's role, I believe, to reach out to those communities and say, this is where you can come. This is where the other place is. This is where the other hold is. This is the closest resource for you and how you can get to that. I think if universities want to be thought leaders, they also need to be service leaders. And you need to use all that wonderful thought to help the communities think through these situations, and specifically honing in on the communities that have the greatest need, the communities that have been historically excluded, the communities that have been historically underserved. When I think about the role of higher education institutions, I think back to my historically Black colleges and universities. I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, since we're talking about backgrounds, Dr. Wallace. I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, where there are three historically Black colleges. It's Alabama A&M University, it's Oakland University, it's J.F. Drake. And I remember growing up, people from Alabama A&M being at the high school, helping with the band. So our band sounded a little bit more like an HBCU band. It was fantastic. It was good for the whole community. There was people from the agriculture department who was going out and helping all the farmers and the sharecroppers to understand what does this mean? What does that mean? How do you get this equipment? Okay, you can't afford a cow. Let me talk to you about getting goats, because that's something you can't afford. You can still get milk, you can still get beef. There was so much that happened out of the land grant institutions that are HBCUs, these 1890 land grant institutions, that I feel like, to me, set forth kind of the template for the example for how universities should be able to help communities advance equity. Not just, again, on the campus, but in the community, that kind of outreach. I think back to Tuskegee, and I think about George Washington Carver and the things that he was doing to help out the community, the people of Alabama, end up helping everyone in the country and the world. And if that's the kind of thought leaders and the kind of thought process that we're having with these faculty members and these staff at universities, why aren't we continue to having those kind of effects that don't necessarily bring us money? Okay, Tuskegee ain't the richest university in the world, but if they came up with some peanut butter, they should be getting money from Jif, okay, from Peter Pan, from everywhere else. But if these institutions really took that kind of thought to put out to their community, or the places where people want to come to as a city that has a university, because those kind of support services there, because that kind of outreach is happening. That's the role I believe higher education should be in. I know I'm speaking a lot to public institutions and public land grant institutions, but I believe that other institutions that are not necessarily serving farmers directly can also be helping to serve these businesses and help them figure out how not to close. Help these independent, small businesses know, all right, this is how you set up to survive during this pandemic. This is how you guard yourself when it comes to some of these social political situations. This is how you can support the community. This is how you can get involved. I believe there's a large role that higher education institutions should be playing for advancing equity in the community. And of course, it needs to start on the campus. How are you reaching out to the students to tell them about where do you get a laptop? How do you sign up for these classes online? What to expect when you're taking classes virtually? How do you prepare for that? How do you still get these support services? I think, Monica, you were saying earlier, the analogy that was going in my head is when somebody's no longer physically with you, the phone calls start becoming a lot more important. Okay, that phone call means so much more than I'm really interested in your feelings and emotions when you're no longer in this space with me. And I believe that institutions, their role for the students on the campus, the employees on the campus, and the surrounding community should be that of, I'm really concerned about this phone call. I'm really concerned about this communication, your feedback, your emotions, and your feelings. And as people see that, I think they will contribute to the university and contribute to the community. So what's the role? It's a lot of roles, just like there were a lot of issues. It's a big role as well.
And I appreciate all that, Dr. Daniel, and all of you, because it's making me think of everything. So HBCU life is a different life. And if you were there, you were in the community working, because that's what they expected of you. So I was volunteering with enrichment programs and keeping kids in school and making sure they had tutoring, because that's what we were supposed to do. That reach back down and pull somebody up with you mentality was very prevalent at Fisk University. That talent and 10th gets ingrained in your brain. It doesn't work out that way, but you still reach down and do what you can. And I think HBCUs and HSIs have that community mindset already, so they're invested in making sure that happens. I think where we struggle as a educational system, unfortunately, is with our predominantly white institutions. And it's not because they can't do it, it's because that's not how they were built. And if you're not built that way, it takes much more energy to move the needle to get you to do that work sort of organically and as part of who you are. IU does have a speaker series, but I don't think the community people know that, hey, if you want an expert to come talk to you where you are, we got a list, who you want to talk to. And we're probably going to do it for free, because that's part of our mission with what we're doing. We don't have the same kind of investment in giving faculty or staff some time off to go out to do some of this outreach and an investment in the communities around us. because it's not part of our job descriptions. And if it's not in our job descriptions, that's a hard sell for some of us sometimes. I think the other thing that we're not really maybe always honest with is we don't do a great job inviting the community in anymore. We used to do that, I think, as a matter of course, because they were around us. But as we've gotten bigger, we've gotten more insular, and we just think, well, if they want to come, they'll come. That doesn't work. The first time we did a really sort of deep Black History Month program on campus, I was very intentional about reaching out to all the Black churches and saying, hey, here's your invitation. And guess what? We're going to have some door prizes. They're not going to be anything that banks the break, but we're going to have something if you sign up and bring your children. I had people who had seen me in the community who didn't realize I was a professor on campus. But that connection in that moment went, oh, my child can come here because they will be safe now. They don't know me. They don't know what the child's going to major in. But they see our faces and think, this campus is at least committed to letting my child see me or see themselves. And I think that's the one thing we don't ever really get into when we talk about DEI work the way that we really need to, is seeing yourself in a space allows you to think about possibilities you would not have considered before that. Like, I didn't know that there were Black women PhDs until I got to Fisk. And at that point, I'm like, oh, I can do whatever I want to. All right, let's get this figured out. I knew MDs because they're doctors, they're everywhere, but a PhD doing something else hadn't even crossed my mind. And the one message that I got from all of my professors was my main job was to find my replacements, whatever that meant. I needed to mentor, I needed to network, I needed to go out of my comfort zone and make sure people were there to replace me whenever I got ready to leave. Because otherwise I was going to leave a vacuum, and that wasn't fair. So what we're needing to do is be better about connecting to our community and then giving them resources, not always education, because that always feels like we're kind of pandering in that sense, but giving them the resources to go look and find and explore with our assistance if they want.
So y'all have all brought up great things as usual. And it has gotten me to want to ask a question inside of a question. So we talked about Dr. Darnell and Dr. Davis talked about kind of this idea of allowing the community to see themselves replicated in higher education in a lot of ways as a recruitment tool. I'm using this, my air quotes. And what this brought into my mind was this idea of double agency, right? So for folks who are able to see our panel and to know that this is a education conference housed within the Indiana Black Expo, and for me to say that everyone on our panel today has an intersectional Black identity up front on this. There also is this sense of double agency, double responsibility to the work and community that I think we all have in some way talked about, right? But let's talk about the respectability side of this and how, in some ways, this prestigious nature, or the airs of which we have all in some ways put on, assumed, moved within, often acts as a barrier to the community and even sometimes the students that we may engage with. And I know, lovingly, we are very excited about all of our academic credentials, and, me and Rachel pre-PhD, but even what does that mean to be in a system and having to navigate in that system, knowing that it was not originally created for us, and knowing that in some ways we cloak ourselves to look like the system when we know our community does not always look like the system or see itself there. So can we speak to that? Like, what is that kind of bifurcation, that frustration of being of a place, but not from a place, or in a place and not of a place, if that makes sense?
It absolutely makes sense. And this is something that I struggle with in terms of, it's always at the forefront of my mind because I'm essentially participating in a system that I'm attempting to dismantle. And so it's that that tug of war almost. So even when we talked about the social justice movement that was happening and how this was our time that we had to leverage, and it was like, my community is hurting and I'm hurting, but I have to act in this moment. I can't sit still. I have to do something. I have to say something. I have to come up with something. And I think that it is conflicting. As Monica was saying, as a pre-PhD, it was almost something that I didn't want to get because I didn't want to have this tone of elitism. I didn't want to perpetuate this dynamic of classism, even within higher education, those who are the doctors and those who are not, and perpetuate that classism. And I ultimately decided to do it, but it was, again, still that tug of war. And because the people around me, in terms of my community, aren't people with PhDs. They aren't people who have gone to Big Ten institutions, who have gone to these historically white institutions. And to be honest, where I'm from, most of them don't go to college at all. And it's common that I'm around people who may have gotten out of jail or been in jail, or who've had individuals with drug abuse. It's common to be around that from where I'm from. But in order to be able to help my community, I have to be able to equip myself with the tools that are necessary to do it. But then that also goes back to the role of higher education institution. There shouldn't be this us and them dynamic. If we really want to be honest, these institutions took over other people's land. There were people here before these institutions were here. So they should be a part of the actual communities. And this also goes into like pre-college programming. How are we getting students to see at a young age that they are a part of this institution, when to have that infinity, to want to be a part of it and to want it to be their community?
I appreciate that. I'm going to steal a quote for a second and I'm going to start talking. Because the minute you asked that question, James Baldwin popped in my head because I've been referencing him a lot over the last year. And the quote was, "To be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a rage almost all the time." The duality you're talking about is frustrating because I need to be Dr. Davis to get some work done, but I don't need to be Dr. Davis to connect to my students. So a lot of them may end up calling me Dr. Roz or some other abbreviation that gets closer to. The doctor has to stay because Black women don't get their PhDs recognized as much as they need to. Having said that, we are fun. We are friendly. This is the professory is you're going to get from me. 90% of the time you see me, I'm wearing a t-shirt for my psych hip hop class. That is either something referring to rap or something referring to the culture, because I want them to see the other stuff. So right in the middle of the 2016 campaign season, I was probably wearing my No Puedo shirt more than anything else. No, I cannot. And my students who could read Spanish were cracking up as they rode by. Like, oh, she's silly. And I'm okay with that because I don't need to be at a power differential between you to educate you and help you. I do need to have that power to educate you in general, though. That's how that works. Like, I have to have access to the structure to change it. And so much like Rachel, my community is very broad, especially within my family structure. There are like 7 of us of the 60 cousins that have gone and gotten degrees. So we can cut it up with everybody in there. This is the Dr. Davis voice. This is not the Roslyn voice. So you have to be able to, for lack of a better phrase, code switch when you need to connect to the people you have to.
Dr. Davis, you said something that I had to take a moment and write down. I don't need to be at a power differential to educate you. When I say that is counter to how we when I say we, I'm talking about a collective we, have come to understand education. And if we are also going back to the pandemic and having come from a smaller institution, working professionally before, a small private college in a rural area, to now working at a large state institution, I can say there are colleges and universities who purposefully avoided digital presence. They didn't want their students to use the internet online. They didn't want them to have coursework online. They didn't want to have to use, the only way that you could see education was a small class with a professor standing on the stage telling you what that you're supposed to know, you need to remember it, regurgitate it, and that was education, right? And then the pandemic came along, and all of a sudden, we had to go find these children to teach us how to use the Facebook. We need you. How can we put a lesson in Instagram? How can we connect to folks using the mediums they've perfected, right, to help them access knowledge in different ways, right? And that has become in lots of ways how many institutions are teaching at this point, how they are shifting conversations and cultural dynamics and letting folks get into discussions critically is through these mediums that we previously blamed the youths for, right? The millennials, yes, I'm a millennial, and I'm glad y'all had to learn that we wasn't wrong, okay? And the Gen Z are really leading the way as far as innovation and technology, and colleges and universities are getting on their bandwagon. So they're essentially teaching us how to teach them. We're going to go to the next question, which is just a question to share anything that, oh no, that's the audience one. That one's right. Basically, I don't think it was on the slide. Thank you, Dr. Wallace. Basically, what I wanted to give folks was the opportunity to share initiatives that they are working on. But I think what I'm going to do is table that to our final thoughts. So you all can, if you need to make your side notes of things that you want to share with our participants, when we get to that, we can go ahead and go to the questions from our audience, because we have just under 30 minutes, but I wanted to make sure we had time to answer some of these folks' questions. First set of questions coming from Julius Brownlee, thank you, was to talk about that HBCU experience and how maybe some of these things that we talked about previously show up on the HBCU campus. So for instance, the pandemic's impact on HBCU campuses, the social political movements impact on HBCU campuses, how have all of those things impacted our colleagues and community members on those HBCU campuses?
I will jump in real quickly. I will say that what we're seeing and what we're expecting to see some more of is almost the same kind of we had from A Different World. When A Different World came out, enrollment started going up at HBCUs. When we started putting back out clear and present on Front Street what's happening in the world still, in the community still, and sometimes at these colleges, or what's not happening at these colleges, I think students are starting to get that idea again. Oh yeah, I need to go where home is, right? Instead of chasing the money, I need to chase the love. And some people are starting to show back up at Tennessee State University now. The population, their enrollment is starting to grow at some different HBCUs. So that's some of the impact that's been happening at HBCUs. HBCUs were also pretty quick to jump on. Some of the larger ones, I would say, were quick to jump on going online as well, and did not. I know there were different institutions that were doing different things. When March came, it hit a lot of people really quickly, and some people kind of eased into it. At some HBCUs, they just simply said, even before spring break hit, just go home. We're online. We're not even about to play. And in other HBCUs, it was a little bit slower transition, but it depended on the one. But something that I think has generally kind of hit across the yard and across the way was the enrollment going up. But then also some of the legislation has been fast forwarded. I know that down in Tennessee, Harold Love was able to get some legislation through he's been working on since I was a student there, and getting it kind of put out there in Front Street and recognized that the government, the state, has not been given this Tennessee State University as the sole public HBCU, and as a land grant in that state, HBCU land grant state, has not been giving them the matching funds, right? Some of the other situations and lawsuits that's been going on at HBCUs about equity and not getting their fair share or the matching funds from the state has actually come to the fore as well. So enrollment's up. Of course, with the pandemic, parties are down, but the love is always there. And I believe that's what's happening from what I've seen, my perspective, and some of the connections I have with our wonderful 107.
Carl, I like how you put that last piece. The love is always there. When I've been watching, what's been happening nationally, particularly with a lot of the, the athletes, picking HBCUs to go in and take their talents to, Deion Sanders and others, going back to coach and
Jackson State University, I love. I'm from Mississippi. I just had to put that in there.
So I mean, there's a movement, in that regard, because folks want that experience. They want that love that they perhaps may not have received or don't perceive as being present at PWI. So that's certainly something to keep our eye on. Hopefully, Jeff Bezos's ex-wife will continue to make funds available. So that's all I'll say about that.
And we can't ignore the saga that's going on right now, or that has transpired with Nicole Hannah-Jones and the switch from UNC to Howard University, the Mecca, as folks have called it. But just this idea that people are actively chipping away at the myth that HBCUs are in some way a lesser alternative or a lesser option to produce, intellectual thinkers or folks, regardless of race, but especially African-American folks, who can get into higher education and thrive, right? So I think we have seen over the course of these last 2 years a cultural shift in focus. We also have not mentioned Beyonce. Let's be honest, HBCUs opened up wide when Beyonce went to Coachella and banded her way in whatever way that was to talk about, the Black college experience. So I'm
still a little bit about that one. We'll come back to that later. Because
right now, me and Beyonce share a birthday, not a bank account. But
I appreciate that, but the misspelling of homecoming still irks my spirit. It still irks my spirit because I hate people misspelling things with Greek letters. It just woosah. What I was going to say is, yes, the enrollment is up, and I appreciate that. I've seen a lot of my friends and sorority sisters sending their kids off to HBCUs this most recent calendar year, which is phenomenal. I think the other thing that's happening, though, is the already sort of tenuous demands on professors' times at HBCUs has ratcheted up. So they are underpaid and they are overworked. And that is not something we're going to get away from just because we get a few high-profile hires. We have to work that out because we need those schools. To your point earlier, HBCUs have always produced the most Black doctors across the board in all fields than any other set of schools. And that's because they figure out how to love on us, to Carl's point. My professors were in my business, but that being in my business got me out of school and it got me connected to the places that I needed to be. So that kind of experience you cannot really pay for and you don't fully appreciate until you get somewhere else. So yeah, I will still call on one or two of them and say, hey, I need a coach because I don't know what's going on with all of this. And they are usually very happy to help out. And they were the people that instilled in me. My job was to make sure someone else had that experience, no matter where I was.
Thank you. Adrian Mabry asked, and this is an IU specific question. It is, how do you see the groups program as being helpful to our Black and low income students who participate in the program? And I can take that on. I know also on the Bloomington campus, Dr. Darnell, if you have things to share at the end, you can. The Group Scholars Program on the Indiana University Bloomington campus has more than a 50-year history of bringing specifically Black students, and the program subsequently expanded to other marginalized identities to the Bloomington campus. There was a summer program that was initiated to basically prepare students for the traditional calendar year. And that program has provided advisors and academic support, as well as a community engagement piece that has definitely impacted the Indiana University Bloomington campus in some very specific ways. We see the connection of the Group Scholars Program to many of our traditional cultural pillars that we have on campus. The Groups Program was there before there was a Neil Marshall Black Culture Center. It was there alongside with the founding and origins of the IU Soul Review and subsequently the African American Arts Institute. It was there in collaboration and building along with the Hudson and Holland program, which previously was the MAPS program. So that program was one of many ways that Indiana University really started its push to create critical mass of minoritized students on campus. Also to be fully, to broaden the scope for higher education specifically, lots of college campuses went about creating these, specifically predominantly white college campuses, went about creating these types of programs to do this type of work. And there are also some national programs like the Posse Scholars Program that took kind of similar ideologies, where if you get students to come in groups, that the group itself could be an additional way that the group could protect itself, right? So a way in which higher education basically put the onus on minoritized people to help build their own persistence and grit and fortitude, right? So I think for the college campus of Indiana University, Bloomington, the Groups Program did a very great work. For the students who are group scholars, that alumni base run deep. You know, they're not a fraternity or sorority, but look, if you run up on a group student in the wrong way, regardless of how old they are when they graduated, they will get you together, honey. Do not talk about groups. And they got a chant too, gotta be careful. They set that chant off to tell your whole function. But that's what I have. Carl, do you have anything you want to share?
Everything you just said, I support that. I just want to double on the whole community building piece. To step on this campus as a doctoral student, I couldn't be in groups. Groups wasn't for grad students. When I stepped on the campus, I'm just gonna call it what it is. I'm coming from Alabama. Then I went to Tennessee State University, lived in Dallas for a little while, came back to Tennessee State University, and then I came to Bloomington, Indiana. It didn't feel like love. It didn't feel like home. It didn't feel like care. And I had to go piece by piece trying to build community. And I believe that's what a lot of our students go through who don't have the opportunity to participate in these programs. So I'm always pushing and urging for students to look for, when you're looking for a campus to attend, look for communities that are already built, that are actually in the structure, that are ingrained. And for the groups program I think groups is very specific to IU and IU Bloomington, but there are other programs at other schools, like you were saying. There's that thing that comes from TRIO, student support services, that a lot of institutions can have. And student support services generally, just like Upward Bound and Educational Talent Search, kind of leans more towards underrepresented and low-income students. And in my experience, student support services has always been very Black. So if you can find student support services, if there's a strong student support services TRIO program on the campus, you can get close to it. But when you spend 7 weeks together in the summer before everybody else gets there, you almost make a mini Black village of sorts before everybody else gets here, so that when other 42,000 show up, you have some connection, you have some home, you have some community, and that's something the groups program does amazingly well, is build that group, that community. That chant is strong as well. I ain't about to jump into nothing.
Gee, it's what? No, let me stop, because I ain't gonna do it wrong. You do that chant wrong, they be talking about you. I ain't trying to get talked about.
I'm not going to violate. I am going to say the groups program is wonderful. The Hudson Highland Scouts program as well helps build community. And there are other initiatives at other institutions that are kind of similar to those. But I will continue to lean on. It's very strong in the Group Scholars program. It's very strong in the Hudson Highland Scouts program. And I would always push students to look for similar types of programs at their institutions. But nothing beat the HBCU. I'm being subjective here. I'm being subjective.
Monica, there's a question, since we're talking about resources.
Yeah.
Dawn Fable asked a question of what would be a good way to connect my high school with university and the resources there. Can we speak to that?
Yes. Do you want to answer, or do you want me to jump in there?
Please jump in.
Okay, so we do have an Office of Community School Partnerships. I know that exists in the broader sense through the Office of the Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Multicultural Affairs. But depending on where you are locally, there are probably touch points on the campus that's closest to you that can give you just the updates on like what programs are going on, who's doing what things would be great for K through 12 students or rising high school students. But I think what happens is that people really just funnel themselves through to admissions. And that's a great place. You know, if you have a student that you're ready to send on, help them do the application, so on and so forth. But, you know, we have museums on campus. We have various programs. If you are close to the Bloomington area with our Jacobs School of Music, I didn't know this until I had my child, that you actually can get the little children in there so they can get some rhythm. We still praying on that because her daddy ain't got none. But to get some rhythm, you know, we have the African American Dance Ensemble where you as community members could actually take classes or participate in the dance program. So, and I know with IUPUI and Northwest and all of these other places that there are lots of ways that the community can engage and be engaged. And I also am not going to put that onus on the community just to do the engaging. There are ways that we can be better at how we reach out. I do know, for instance, like in Bloomington, the Balfour Scholars Program exists. We also have, with that community school partnership, I know there's a partnership with Boys and Girls Clubs. So there are just lots of ways that engagement can happen. But I will be the one to say that maybe both sides of that coin need to work on getting that better outlined.
And I think it's perfectly reasonable if you're contacting the campus to say, hey, is there a Black faculty or staff person, or if that's what you're looking for, that I can talk to? Because I have questions for them. Like I've had parents pop up in my office about their students going to our campus, like, who are you and why? Well, they told me to come talk to you. I'm like, oh, well, let's have a conversation then. And I'm okay with that. And most of us are. So if that's a request you have, whatever that request is, make it. Be overt. We can't read your minds. And if you get here later, you're upset, we won't know until you're upset. So just ask for what you need on the front end. We'll try to take care of it.
Yeah, and I would connect. I'm sorry, go ahead, Rachel.
Okay. I'm gonna echo what Rosalind said, because definitely reach out. If you see me, I'm on a directory, email me. I'm willing to help. If I don't know a resource, I will find you one and point you in the right direction. But absolutely. And granted, I never went to HBCU, but I feel like that shouldn't be the only place that a Black student can feel loved. I feel like and groups is an example of a place where students can create that community and have that love without it being an HBCU. It's Black people all over the world, and they should not, HBCU should not be the only place that they feel welcomed, and that we value their intelligence and value the things that they bring. And if institutions don't start taking that approach that they love and value and want students, Black students, that's why they're going to go to HBCU.
I just wanted to get a plug in for the Indiana University Student Success Corps. It was based out of IUPUI. Dr. Kaula Murtada with Community and School Partnerships is spearheading that effort, and it offers free mentoring and tutoring to students at the regional campuses and at IUPUI as well. A lot of that is virtual. That's a program that's been in existence. It was formerly Indiana Kids. It's been in existence for some time now. And, through that program, that's that mutually beneficial relationship that we were talking about earlier. The young folks, the next generation of leaders are getting the support they need. Our students are receiving that co-curricular experience. And then potentially those students will have a favorable relationship and will come to IU. So, there's all sorts of opportunities and resources that are out there that all you have to do is just reach out to us and we're there to serve. So next question.
So we have just under 10 minutes and I want to make sure that we get this question out because I know that there are several folks who are DEI professionals in our participant group. But this question is from Christina and it says, can you speak to the high turnover amongst DEI professionals? And specifically, how? This the question I ask myself on a regular basis. How do you stay motivated while doing this work?
Okay, I'll jump in with a quick one because I know the time. What we have, I can't speak directly to the quick turnover because a lot of the DEI professionals I know are still in their roles or actually have been elevated. A lot of the ones that I know personally. But for how do we stay motivated, the ones that I'm in connection with normally, we actually have formed a staff diversity council and we meet regularly. Outside of meetings, we're talking on the instant messaging, we're talking on the text. We are constantly staying in communication with each other. We are building community. We're finding opportunities for each other. When we find out that something works in the school education, we share it and now we're about to get it working in your school as well. So that's how we stay motivated. There's also a larger group that I'm a part of with the School of Educations at all the Big Ten institutions, and we meet as well. And we just encourage each other. We build up more community and do the same thing. Oh, that worked at Wisconsin, that worked at Michigan. Let's try that over here at our institutions as well in our schools of education. Also, I have to admit, the School of Education at Indiana University Bloomington is very supportive. I can stay motivated because in the School of Education specifically, I'll speak to that. There's been a lot of yes, and yes is motivating for sure.
So I will say turnover is related to the stress of the work. We are asked to move mountains with a shovel a lot of times, and that is difficult work.
A soup spoon.
Whatever, it's not big enough to move the mountain. Let's just say that, and not in a timely fashion. So you can get paid better doing this work literally almost anywhere else. So if I'm going to be stressed out, I might as well be paid better to do it somewhere else. So I think that's part of the turnover. In terms of motivation, I'm not going to lie, it ebbs and flows. I love my job. I love all the things I get to do. That does not mean it's not tiring. That does not mean there are not moments where I'm trying to figure out, well, why am I doing it? But I see my students and I see them excited about an opportunity that I was able to develop, or I see a colleague who's sort of settling in now and feeling like I'm community. That's what keeps me motivated, but I'm not going to lie, like it's not a perpetual thing that I have to work on. Self-care has become much more necessary for me over the last year. So yeah, it's an ebb and flow. And if that nice job with the Utah Jazz had been in Dallas, I might not be talking to y'all right now. Oh, they had opened up a DEI position for the team, but it's in Utah and I don't want to live in Utah. So had it been in Dallas.
Yeah, for me, I think that, a lot of the turnover is, part of burnout, and, people are getting into positions where institutions say that they want to do these things, but it's more performative and they're not necessarily committed. When you get behind the scenes, there's people who are resistant to the change. And that can be frustrating. It can lead to a lot of folks moving around. But for me, I haven't experienced that. I think the community of DEI professionals They support each other, much the way Carl indicated that they do. For me, there's a newness to it. Every day is different for me. And I learned something new about a different culture, different ethnicity, just a different way of doing things. And that's exciting to me, and it keeps me interested in the work. So that's why I keep doing it.
Okay, I'm gonna take a quick second just to jump in with something that was said earlier as well. I know we mentioned the Balfour Scouts program and other ones. There are a lot of resources through precollege.indiana.edu and other kind of pre-college sites at different institutions. The Balfour Scouts program, of which I'm the director, and the Hustle Scouts program and the School of Education, because of all the different hats that I wear. I'm not waiting for you to contact me. I will come to you. Believe that. Part of these yeses I get is the outreach I get to do. And I get to come. James Wallace, I've been up there a couple of times in Northwest Indiana with you. I go beyond just where the IU campuses are. I'm going to any part of the state of Indiana I can. If I find out there's a school that got 50% or more Black students, I'm coming to your school because I'm trying to tell you about opportunities. With the Balfour Scouts program, we tell you about more than just Indiana University. We tell you about how to get into higher education, period. And as a graduate of Tennessee State University, I kind of push HBCUs as well. But yes, absolutely. There are opportunities. And I think the university, another role of it is to reach out to the communities. I'm done.
Are there any, because we have 3 minutes, are there any support things that we want to make sure people walk away with? I know we've said several today, community school partnerships, pre-college, the Group Scholars Program, Hudson Holland, work specifically with your campuses that are close to you, reach out to Black faculty and staff. Anything else we want to make sure these folks know before we step on away?
I would just say that the regionals don't have all of those lovely programs. We have other stuff that we can give you, so touch base with us and we will figure out how we can get you to where you need to be. We also like to say we are much cheaper than our colleagues. We love y'all, but we cheaper by the time it's all said and done. So you might want to give us a look for no other reason than that. I will say there are a ton of questions we were not able to get to. If you have anything specifically you want to reach out to me about, feel free to contact me.
I would just say in closing that, we have some wonderful students on our campus and they need opportunity. I've seen so many students they go through 4, 5, 6 years of study, get to the end of that road, and then are not able to transition into the workforce. So our students need internship and experience opportunities. So those of you that are on the call, that are in the business community, that are in a position to offer that experience to some of our students, please consider doing so. You won't be disappointed.
Dr. Brooks?
Yes.
You want to give some parting words?
I'll conclude, take us out on a positive note, is that you all are loved, your students are loved, your families are loved. We appreciate you. Thank you for coming today.
That works for me. Anybody else? Anything to say? We have 1 whole minute.
I was just going to throw in quickly. I want to mention this because I learned it at TSU. There are ninjas and there are warriors. Just because you don't see this person out front making a lot of noise, it doesn't mean they're not pushing and fighting. There are some of us who are on the inside messing up the works to make it better for our students. There are ninjas and there are warriors. So don't sleep on the ninjas now. That's all I'm saying. We're here to support. We love you and we want to show love. Connect with these ninjas and the warriors.
Absolutely. Y'all, thank you for being with us today. If you don't remember anything else today, please know that we are here to support however we can in the community. We definitely believe in our communities and we believe in the power of higher education. If you are a DEI person, if you're doing that work, please take care of yourself. You cannot pour from an empty cup. If you empty, you ain't got nothing to give. So disconnect, turn off so you can be of use to the greater good. But thank you to Indiana Black Expo for having us. And again, to Indiana University for supporting initiatives like this. We have been your panel. Have a great day.